There is a car show in China right now where you can walk past an electric car with a price tag of $1,000. Not a deposit, not a lease payment, the whole car. 4 wheels, a seat, a battery, a windscreen, and a key that goes in your pocket for less than half of what most people in America hand over for a phone that lives in the same pocket. In this video, we are going to break down exactly how that price is possible, why the explanation everyone reaches at first is completely wrong, and what it means for the car sitting in your driveway right now. Because when Western visitors first see those vehicles lined up in an exhibition hall, the reaction is almost always the same. They laugh, they take a photo, they call it a toy. And then, about 10 seconds later, something shifts. They start doing the maths on their own commute. And the joke stops being funny very quickly because the average new vehicle in the United States now costs close to $50,000. And that gap is not a rounding error. That gap is a completely different idea of what a car is supposed to be. If you enjoy this kind of breakdown, hit that like button and subscribe before we get into it. These take a serious amount of research to put together, and every single genuinely helps more people find the channel. Now let us get into the number that started all of this. In the United States right now, the average new vehicle costs close to $50,000. Not a luxury model, not a performance car, the average, the middle of the road. The thing a normal person with a normal job is expected to sign up for. And to make that number work on a monthly budget, loan terms stretched from 4 years to 6, then 7, and in some cases 8. Millions of Americans now owe more on their car than the car is actually worth. That is the baseline. That is what normal looks like in the West. Now hold that up against what is happening on the other side of the world. In China, you can walk into a showroom and buy a small electric car for somewhere between $1,000 and $10,000. It has 4 seats, it has a heater, it has air conditioning, a screen, airbags, and a battery that will comfortably handle a week of city driving on a single charge. It is registered, insured, and legal on public roads. It is not a novelty and it is not a golf cart. Millions of people have bought one and use it every single day to get to work. The instinct in the West is to explain this away in one sentence. Cheap labor. That is the reflex answer, and 20 years ago it would have been mostly correct. Today it explains almost nothing. Labor makes up a shrinking slice of what it costs to build a modern car, and in a highly automated electric vehicle factory, that slice is smaller still. Chinese wages have also risen dramatically over the last 2 decades. If cheap hands were the whole story, the prices would have climbed back up years ago. They did not. They kept falling. So something else is doing the work. The first part of the real answer has nothing to do with the factory at all. It has to do with a question that Chinese manufacturers asked out loud, and that most Western manufacturers quietly stopped asking sometime in the 1990s. What does the average person actually need from a car? Not what looks good in a commercial filmed on a mountain road. Not what wins a magazine comparison test. What does a real person with a real commute, in a real city, on a real budget, actually do with a vehicle on a Tuesday morning? When you sit with that question honestly, the answer is embarrassingly modest. Drive 20 or 30 miles. Drop the kids somewhere, pick up groceries, come home. That is the overwhelming majority of what the overwhelming majority of drivers do, with the overwhelming majority of their driving time. So if you design the car around that reality instead of around a hypothetical worst-case road trip, everything downstream changes. The battery gets smaller. A smaller battery means less weight. Less weight means smaller motors, smaller brakes, a lighter frame, thinner suspension components, and less structure to hold all of it together. Every one of those savings triggers another saving. That chain reaction is the single most important thing to understand here, and it runs in both directions. In the West, the chain has been running the wrong way for 30 years. More features means more weight. More weight means a bigger battery. A bigger battery means more lithium, more nickel, more cobalt, more raw material, more mining, more shipping, more assembly time, and more cost before a single badge goes on the bonnet. Many of the best-selling electric vehicles in America now weigh over 4,500 pounds. Some are over 6,000. The typical job that 6,000-pound machine performs is moving one adult from a house to an office and back again. Chinese manufacturers broke that chain at the very first link. The cheapest battery is the one the vehicle never needed. The cheapest material is the one that never went in. The cheapest feature is the one nobody installed because the data showed almost nobody uses it. Individually, none of those decisions saves very much money. Stacked across an entire vehicle, they produce a final price that the rest of the industry had genuinely convinced itself was no longer achievable on a real, road-legal car. But design philosophy only gets you part of the way. The other half of this answer is the factory system, and it is the part almost nobody outside the industry ever sees. Imagine building an electric car in the United States. The cells come from one supplier. The pack assembly happens somewhere else. The power electronics come from a third company. The screens are shipped in from overseas. The software is written by yet another firm entirely. Every handoff adds shipping cost, lead time, coordination overhead, and margin for somebody else. Now imagine building the same car in an industrial region where the cell maker, the pack assembler, the motor manufacturer, the electronics supplier, the display supplier, and the software team are all within a few hours of each other. Where the same electronics plants are already producing components at massive volume for smartphones, home batteries, solar systems, and scooters at the same time. Where an engineer can drive to the supplier, look at the problem, and have a revised part in testing the following week. The whole thing stops behaving like a chain of separate businesses and starts behaving like one enormous machine that gets a little faster every year. That is why Chinese brands can push out new models and mid-cycle updates at a pace that genuinely unsettles Western product planners. The feedback loop is shorter at every single stage. And nowhere does that compounding advantage show up more clearly than in batteries. Because the battery has become what the engine used to be. It is the single most expensive, most strategically important component in the vehicle. And China did not just build battery factories. It built the entire ecosystem underneath them, from raw material processing all the way through to cell manufacturing and recycling. Once the battery gets cheaper, the car gets cheaper, the scooter gets cheaper, the delivery van gets cheaper, and eventually transportation itself gets cheaper. There is one more piece, and it is the one that turns a good price into an impossible one: scale. When you are building and selling vehicles across dozens of markets at once, your total production volume rises to a level that pushes the per-unit cost down hard. Lower cost lets you drop the price. A lower price brings in more buyers. More buyers push volume higher. Higher volume pushes cost down again. The cycle feeds itself, and the longer it runs, the harder it becomes for anyone outside it to match those numbers without tearing up their entire approach to how they design and build cars. So, put those three things together. A vehicle designed around what people actually do instead of what they might theoretically do one weekend a year. A supply chain compressed into a geographic cluster where everything moves faster and costs less. And production volume large enough to grind the per-unit cost down every single quarter. That is how a car ends up on a showroom floor, priced like a premium smartphone. Not one trick. 3 structural advantages stacked on top of each other, built patiently over about 2 decades. Now here's the part that people in Detroit and Stuttgart and Nagoya are genuinely worried about, and it is not the tiny car itself, it is what the tiny car proves. Because for a very long time, the industry operated on a shared assumption that below a certain price point, a proper car simply could not be built. Not profitably, not safely, not to any standard worth putting a badge on. That assumption justified an enormous amount of pricing behavior. And a few million cars later, that assumption is just gone. History has a fairly unkind pattern here. Disruption almost never arrives from above. It arrives from below, in the segment the incumbents already walked away from because the margins looked too thin to bother with. American manufacturers dismissed compact Japanese imports in the 1970s as irrelevant to what American buyers wanted. Then fuel prices spiked, and within a single generation, Toyota, Honda, and Nissan went from curiosities to permanent fixtures. Detroit never fully recovered the position it held before that. The executives who studied that history carefully are the ones watching most closely right now. And the affordable car story has not stayed inside China. In Europe, where fuel is expensive and city streets are narrow, small and cheap has always had a natural audience. And Chinese market share there has climbed year after year. In Southeast Asia, Latin America, and parts of Africa, The maths is even more dramatic. For a family that had no realistic path to owning a car at all under traditional pricing, a dependable vehicle at $8,000 or $9,000 is not a product choice. It is a change in what their life is allowed to look like. Western manufacturers are not standing still, to be fair. Volkswagen has talked publicly about targeting far lower price points. General Motors has announced cheaper electric models. Ford has committed to aggressive cost reduction. The recognition is clearly there. But recognizing a problem and restructuring a 100-year-old organization around it are two very different projects. These are enormous companies with supplier relationships, tooling, factories, and internal incentives all built around complexity and high margins. Rewiring that takes years, and it means deliberately eating into the profits of the exact vehicles currently paying everyone's salary. Meanwhile, the question underneath all of this is not getting quieter. It is getting louder with every monthly payment that stretches a household budget past comfortable. Why does a new car cost this much? What am I actually paying for? Is there a version of this that just gets me to work and back without a 7-year loan attached to it? Millions of people are asking that right now, and whoever answers it convincingly, wherever they happen to be based, is going to write the next chapter of this industry. The funny thing about disruption is that it almost never looks important on the day it arrives. The first digital camera looked like a toy. The first streaming service looked like a gimmick. And a small, boxy, cheap electric car sitting in a Chinese exhibition hall looks like a joke right up until you realize it is not competing on prestige, or power, or badge value. It is competing on the one thing the industry stopped competing on entirely: cost. And cost, historically, is the thing that wins in the end. If this video gave you something new to think about, hit that like button and subscribe. And turn on notifications so the next one lands in your feed the moment it goes live. Here is the question I want to leave you with. If a reliable electric car that covered every one of your daily driving needs was available tomorrow for the price of a flagship phone, would you actually buy one? Or would you still want something bigger sitting in the driveway? Drop your answer in the comments below. We will see you in the next video.